A soldier, separated from his team, finds himself disoriented, lost in what could be a hostile environment. Without food or water, in unfamiliar surroundings, can he survive? Could you survive?
My Cherokee ancestors lived their whole life in the mountains and swamps of North Carolina because they knew what they could eat and what they couldn't, and what was good for them and what wasn't. I'm Master Sergeant Squire from the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. I'm going to show you some plants that you can use for food to keep you alive in a survival situation. Tell you what parts are all right and what parts are not. How to prepare those foods before you eat them and when to avoid them. I'm going to increase your awareness of the world around you, and this will make you more comfortable in the outdoors and increase your chances of survival. There are many different species of wild onion and garlic. They're usually found in open, sunny areas and can be very hard to tell apart. If you cut a wild onion across the bulb, it will have concentric rings or little circles like onion rings. The garlic will have many individual cloves like those purchased in the store. A key factor or characteristic for recognizing wild onions and garlic is the characteristic onion or garlic smell. If you find something that looks like a wild onion bulb but doesn't have an onion smell, don't eat it. Some relatives of the onion, such as daffodils and some of the lilies, can be poisonous. Garlic and onion are easily found in cool weather but are dormant in summer, making them harder to locate during the warm season. Since onions are so easily recognized, survivors often overeat them, resulting in upset stomachs. You can eat the bulbs of the onion and garlic just as they are, put them in a soup or stew, or place them inside your game to flavor it. Both have a stronger odor and taste than the garden varieties, so it doesn't take as many to achieve the same flavor when cooked. You can use the green parts just like chives. To make onion soup, you boil the bulbs and then add the green parts just before it's finished. This soup contains several vitamins and a large quantity of sulfur, which helps in healing. Therefore, can be very important in a survival situation. There are many different varieties of mint, which peppermint and spearmint are the most common. The wild mints are easy to recognize because of a characteristic square stem. If you cut them across the stem and look down at it, it will seem as if you are looking into a small square box. The Latin family name is Labiatea, which means lips. And if you look closely at the flowers, they look as if they have little lips. Mint is a very helpful plant in a survival situation because it contains chemicals which will both settle the stomach and calm the nerves. This can assist you in sleeping. Doctors often prescribe mint oil or peppermint tea for pregnant women who have upset stomachs and don't want to take drugs and are allergic to Dramamine. Also, mints are used throughout the world as a spice for flavoring meat that have a gamey or overly sweet taste, such as venison, lamb, or pork. Mint can be found in moist areas during most of the year. Wild mustard is a biennial plant found throughout the United States and in much of the other parts of the world at about any time of the year. A key factor in recognizing wild mustard is the four-petaled flower, which gives it the nickname of cruciferous, meaning cross-like. These flowers can be purple, yellow, or white, and they look just like a cross. Another key characteristic to use in recognition is the mustard smell and taste. After the flowers are gone, a seed pod forms which contains several seeds. When the pods are green, they can be placed in soups, stews, and game meat to provide a hot, spicy taste. When these pods mature, they turn brown and hard. You can grind them into a powder and mix it with water or oil made from animal fat or plant substances to make a mustard in the field. Wild mustard greens, which are the tender leaves and stems, provide many nutrients because they're very high in vitamin A and C. Some wild mustard is also called wild horseradish because it develops a thickened rootstock like horseradish. This rootstock can be grated and used as a flavoring. If they're not too spicy, you can use them just like a radish. Dock is one of our most common edible wild plants. It can be found in open sunny areas and disturbed ground. It has many common names and comes in many varieties, such as curly dock, yellow dock, greater dock, and narrow dock. Yellow dock is recognized because of the bright yellow or orange color when you cut the root. Early settlers used these roots to dye cloth. If you boil any dock root, you will have a good antifungal medicine for athlete's foot or other rashes caused by fungus. The tender, flexible dock roots can be boiled and eaten. The green leaves can be chopped up for a salad green or boiled for a cooked green with a lemony taste. Dock is also referred to as wild okra because the stalks contain a mucilaginous chemical similar to okra. When boiled, it resembles boiled okra with the same type of sliminess in the water. You can chop the raw stems into little pieces and fry them to make something similar to fried okra. Dock is also referred to as wild buckwheat, and in fact it's in the buckwheat family. When the plant matures, it produces a triangular seed head which can be ground into a high-protein flour with a buckwheat taste. Plantain is a plant which was brought to this country by the early English colonists. There are many varieties of plantain. The most common are broadleaf plantain, or Plantago major, or narrowleaf plantain, Plantago lanceolata. Plantain is an excellent food source because the entire plant is edible during one season or another. The tender green leaves can be chopped up and used in salads. As the leaves become older, they become tough, stringy, and bitter. However, when parboiled, they make a delicious cooked green and have an anti-diarrheal effect on the body. The leaves also contain a chemical which aids in healing. Place crushed leaves as a poultice on wounds or burns to speed healing and to help fight infection. The seed heads look like those hung in bird cages. The seeds are very high in protein. When green and tender, they can be chopped and added to soups or stews or eaten raw. When the seeds are mature and hard, they can be ground into a flour or roasted on a hot rock or toasted in a pan as a substitute for peanuts. The husks are used in making some commercial medications as laxatives. In China, daylilies are grown as a food plant because the entire plant is edible. It was transported from China to England, however, as an ornamental flower, and the European settlers brought it to this country as such. Daylilies grow in open, sunny areas, disturbed fields, and old home sites. They're common throughout the country. Once you find last year's old stems, you can follow them down to the ground for tubers or swellings on the rootstocks, much like potatoes. These can be chopped up and eaten raw, but like the water chestnut, they don't have very much flavor. However, when the roots are boiled, they develop a taste like sweet corn. Wild food enthusiasts pickle the roots to use in relishes. The shoots, flowers, and young leaves can be eaten raw or chopped up and added to salads. A word of caution, however, if you eat many raw daylily flowers, they will act as a mild laxative. Therefore, you are better off cooking them. The flowers have a hot, spicy taste and are a favorite in Oriental cooking. Oriental food stores sell both the dried and fresh flowers. The flowers can be cooked as a fritter, or when dried, they can be added to soups and stews as a thickener. The Jerusalem artichoke is sometimes called wild sunflower. The scientific name is Helianthus tuberosus. Helianthus tells us it is indeed a sunflower, and tuberosus refers to the tubers or knotty growths under the ground. All through the winter months, you can follow last year's rootstocks of this perennial plant down to the ground to the tubers, or what we call the Jerusalem artichoke. In the western part of this country, artichokes are similar to the flowers of a thistle, but in the southeast, it is the root of this sunflower plant. It can be used in the same way as a potato, boiled, fried, or baked, and it can be eaten raw. Rock rose, or purslane, is a creeping, succulent plant that is often found in people's yards and gardens, but is originally a wild plant throughout much of the country. It provides a natural source of vitamins C and A, and is easily recognized by the 5-petal flower that appears not to have a stem because it attaches itself so closely to the growing stalk. This ground-hugging plant will bloom from the spring to the winter during warm periods. You can chop up the entire plant and eat it raw or boil it for a cooked green. Another plant that blooms in the spring, as well as during warm spells in the winter, are the wild violets. They could have blue, yellow, or white flowers and heart-shaped or oblong leaves, but the flowers always have 2 petals up and 3 petals down. When fresh, they have a nice smell, but they lose all their fragrance and flavor when dried. You can eat all parts of the violet, the leaves, the roots, and the flowers. The wild violet flower was used to make one of the first candies by the English colonists when they came to this country. They would dip the flowers in egg white, then into sugar, let it dry, and repeat the process until they had crystallized violet flowers. There are so many different species of wild violets that they are simply called viola species. Knotweed goes by many names. It is called smartweed because it leaves a burning, stinging taste in your mouth, but this is made mild when you mix it with other greens. This particular species is also called lady's thumb because if you look at the leaves, it has purple and brown markings that are about the size and shape of a lady's thumbprint. There are so many varieties of knotweed that they are lumped together by scientists and called polygonatum species. Japanese knotweed, another variety, is also called wild bamboo by some people. However, it is not a bamboo at all. It looks a lot like bamboo because of its tall, grass-like stems with knots in it. If you cut open the plant, you'll see that it is hollow and that these knots are actually dividers that section off the plant. This plant is also called mock rhubarb, as well as other names. The plant has many uses and a lemony flavor. When the shoots first come up, they can be steamed, boiled, or eaten raw. However, they can be bitter, so cooking is best. As the stem matures and gets taller, you can break it open and eat the lining inside, which will have a lemon or rhubarb taste. This is what people use to make a mock rhubarb jam or pie. This is a common plant along roadsides in open areas where the ground has been disturbed. And there are areas where you can find great colonies of this plant. There are many varieties of cactus which have been called by such names as beaver tail, prickly pear, Indian pear, desert rose, and a Cherokee rose. The entire plant can be eaten, but you have to be careful of the spines. It is common for people in the Southwest to eat the leaves, and they even sell them in the stores as nopales or nopalitos, with a warning that you must use a potato peeler to remove the spines. When the plant is chopped up and eaten raw, it has a cucumber texture and taste with just a hint of lemon. If you don't like them raw, because they tend to be slimy, you can parboil them. After the first boiling, pour off the water to remove the sliminess, add more water, and boil them again. Once cooked in this manner, they will have the consistency of cut green beans and can be chopped and added to omelets or used with other ingredients for tacos, burritos, or salads. Or they can be eaten alone as a cooked vegetable. The leaves, when split lengthwise, can be placed on wounds. The slimy material in them will work much like aloe vera to heal wounds and burns on the surface of the body. The flowers, though short-lived, can be eaten raw. The flowers are followed by round, egg-shaped fruits that are either purple, yellow, or red, and range in size from the end of your little finger up to the size of a chicken egg. When ripe, the fruit will be tender and can be eaten raw or boiled to make a high vitamin C drink, jelly, or syrup. Ounce for ounce, these fruits contain more vitamin C than an orange. The seeds inside the fruit are very hard, but can be ground into a high-protein flour. Sheep sorrel is a relative of the dock plant. This plant is also grown in gardens in other parts of the world. Cream of sorrel soup brings a high price in gourmet restaurants. Sheep sorrel is easily recognized because the leaves are characteristically shaped like an arrowhead. In the spring, large stalks produce red flowers. When you see these flowers, it appears as if the entire field is on fire. The leaves and tender stalks can be eaten raw, chopped and added to other greens, or boiled and eaten as a cooked vegetable. In the summer, when it's very hot, the leaves can be chopped and soaked in water to make a survival drink, which has a cooling effect on the body. It has a high ascorbic acid or vitamin C content and a pleasant citrus flavor and lemony smell. One of our most common and easily recognized weeds is the dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, which translated from the Latin means the official cure for disorders. Throughout history, many medical problems have reportedly been cured by the dandelion. For the survivor, it provides food, since all of its parts are edible. The greens are very high in vitamin C, A, and calcium, and can be eaten raw or boiled. The flower can be dipped in batter and fried into fritters. They are also the part of the plant used to make dandelion wine. Where the leaves meet the roots, there is a pink or white crown that is protected from the sun by the leaves. In gourmet food stores, this crown brings quite a high price. The crown is a lot more tender and sweeter than the rest of the plant. As dandelions grow older, usually after they flower, the leaves develop a bitter taste caused by a white milky sap or latex. This is one of the characteristics in identifying dandelions from some of its lookalikes, called the false dandelion. If you break the leaf stem of the dandelion, it will be hollow and exude a white sap. Lookalikes don't do that. The roots of the dandelion can also be very useful to a survivor. One of the things some people miss most in a survival situation, other than cigarettes, is coffee. The roots can be dry roasted on a hot rock next to a fire, or if preparing at home as a learning experience, in an oven with the door open. After the roots are brown and crisp, they can be ground and boiled just like coffee to produce a coffee substitute which is caffeine-free and naturally sweet. The dogtooth violet, or trout lily, is a spring flowering plant that lives in coniferous and hardwood forests, in shady areas, and often near water. The edible parts of this plant are the leaves and the bulbs. You can recognize it early by its yellow, bell-shaped flowers. It is actually a lily and not a violet. The important recognition factors later are the mottled leaves, which have two different shades of brown and green on them. You should boil the leaves when they are young and tender for about 8 to 10 minutes. You can also boil or bake the bulbs and eat them like a potato. Fiddlehead ferns doesn't refer to a particular variety of fern, but to a stage of their growth. When the young leaves first come out of the ground, they're curled up like the head of a fiddle, and that's how they get their name. The two types of ferns we're looking at here are the ostrich fern, which is the one with the hair, and the bracken. Both of these are found in moist woods and can be eaten at any time of year, while the young leaf frond is uncurling. But the most common time of year for harvesting them is the spring, when they are most plentiful. When the leaves uncurl and mature, they develop a toxin and are considered unsafe to eat. The little fiddleheads are the only safe part to eat on these plants. They can be either boiled or sautéed, but they must be cooked before you eat them. Wild ginger can be boiled to make a tea that calms the stomach. It also raises the metabolism and by so doing provides warmth from inside the body as you drink the tea. The root can also be used to flavor game. The only part that you can use is the root, as nothing else is edible. It can be identified by the heart-shaped leaves and the little brown bell-like flowers. Wild asparagus is one of our favorite spring greens. The scientific name is Asparagus officinale. Anytime you see the word officinale in a scientific name, you'll know that the plant has been used or recognized as a medicinal plant by some government agency. Asparagus should not be eaten raw because it may upset the stomach or act as a laxative. The edible part of this plant looks like little green fingers coming out of the ground. Wild carrot is one of those plants that we use smell as a recognition factor. If you find a plant that looks like a carrot but does not have a carrot smell, avoid it. This plant has some toxic relatives such as poison hemlock and water hemlock, which are related to the wild carrot, since they all fall in the parsley family. Poison hemlock and water hemlock are so deadly that if you have any doubts at all, don't eat it. People have died from eating a single bite of poison hemlock. Wild carrots generally grow in a drier environment, while their poisonous relatives usually grow in a moist environment. First, pull the plant out of the ground and check for the carrot smell. Wild carrots have a yellow or white root instead of the orange root like the garden variety we're used to seeing. The root may or may not be branched depending on the soil it grows in, but it will always have the definite carrot smell. Wild carrot has many common names. It is called Queen Anne's lace because of the white, lacy flowers. It may also be called tickweed because generally there is one flower head or floret that is purple while the others are white, giving the plant the appearance that a tick is on it. It is also called the bird nest plant because after the flowers are matured, the seed heads curl up to look like a little bird nest on the stem. When it has seeds, you can boil them to make a tea that is an anti-flatulent or helps to fight gas. Originally, wild carrots were a medicinal plant used to cleanse the kidneys as an eye wash or taken internally as a medicine to help improve eyesight. Poke is one of our favorite spring greens and is usually called poke salad or poke salad, spelled S-A-L-L-E-T, which is actually an Old English word that means cooked green. This plant cannot be eaten raw, and you can only eat the young tender leaves from a plant up to a height of about 10 inches. If any red coloring is found on the leaves or stem, you should not eat them. The young tender leaves must be boiled in 2 changes of water before being eaten. All other parts of the plant are considered to be poisonous. They're used in the preparation of commercial medicines for heart ailments because they slow down the heart rate. People have died trying to medicate themselves with it. The berries which form later are also poisonous. Therefore, the only time of year you can use poke is in the spring when it is a young shoot, or during warm spells when it sprouts in colder months. Only eat the young tender leaves without any red coloring and only after they have been cooked. Chickweed is familiar to many of us, and there are many different varieties. It is a rambling little weed used in some commercial weight loss preparations because it supposedly has a chemical that dissolves fat. If you look at the list of ingredients on various weight loss preparations, you may see the word stellaria listed, which means that it contains chickweed. The word stellaria means like a star, and if you look at the little white flowers, they look like stars. You can eat the entire plant, raw or cooked. Kudzu is a vine that was brought here in the early 20s from Japan to control erosion. Unfortunately, it has gotten out of hand because in this country it has no natural enemies. It has taken over in some areas and has actually killed entire forests by strangling the trees. It has become an unwanted pest, and even though the government brought it here, it is now illegal in some places to plant it. You can eat the tender shoots raw or boiled. The flowers, which form later, can be boiled or pickled and then eaten. They form clusters of purple or pink pea-like flowers. In Japan, there is a major industry harvesting the roots to make starch. However, this is not an option for the survivor because the roots can be 6 feet below ground level and weigh several hundred pounds. Sassafras is a plant familiar to many of us as a tea. Sassafras was the very first cash crop exported back to England by the colonists. When they arrived in what is now the United States, they found the Indians drinking it because of its licorice flavor and medicinal benefits. One common name for it is green stick because many of the trees have a green stem. It is normally found between woods and fields and is a very common plant throughout much of the country. It is easy to recognize during the growing season because it has 3 different shaped leaves on each tree. One has 3 lobes like a chicken's foot or a bear's claw. A second leaf has a shape like a catcher's mitt or mitten, giving it the common name of mitten tree. The third leaf has a typical elongated leaf shape. The leaves are sold commercially as filet powder in gourmet food shops or in gourmet sections of the market. They're also typically used in Cajun or Creole cooking. You can make this powder yourself by drying the leaves and grinding them up. This powder can be used as a soup thickener or flavorer. The tea is made from the roots. Just pull them out of the ground and boil the roots to make tea. If you have a source of sugar, you can sweeten it and it will taste and smell much like root beer. When you pull a tree out of the ground that you think is a sassafras tree, the characteristic smell of root beer will help identify it. You can also chew on the roots to freshen your breath. Some people call this a toothbrush tree because the young, tender twigs can be slivered and rubbed against the teeth when you don't have a toothbrush. It contains a chemical that will kill bacteria and makes your breath and mouth feel much fresher. The bay tree is commonly found in this country. Bay leaves, used in Italian cooking for making sausage and in soups and stews, are related to this tree. Look for the characteristic bay leaf smell when you crush a leaf in your hand. The leaves themselves are too hard to digest, so like those bay leaves bought in the store, you use these bay leaves for flavor in your cooking and then throw them away before serving. If the leaf doesn't have the characteristic bay leaf smell, don't use it because there are some lookalikes in the magnolia family or sweet bays that are poisonous to eat. My name is Tom Squire. In the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce you to some plants that are common in our training area, but it can be found all over the world, and tell you how you can use those to keep yourself alive in a survival situation. Most important thing to look for when using grasses for food is the jointed stems. The biggest grass in the world is bamboo. If you look at the joints on the stem, you can compare bamboo to the smaller grasses and see their similarities. Grasses contain a high amount of cellulose, which is very hard to digest. That's why animals which are herbivores, such as cows and goats, have 3 or more stomachs. For a survivor, the best way to use grass as food is to chew up the tender green parts, which can be found at any time of the year, swallow the juice, and spit out the bulk. Of course, for the larger grasses like bamboo, we can use the shoots as they come out of the ground by boiling them, removing the outer hull, and cutting them into thin slices like the ones you find in the store. Something useful on all grasses is the seed, which varies greatly in size depending on the type of grass. Remove seed husk by rubbing and then grind the seeds into a high-protein flour. Mullein is easily recognized because of the flower spikes it grows in the second year of growth. It can be as high as 6 feet tall and covered with yellow flowers. It is a biennial plant found throughout the world and can provide us with food and medicine. The Native Americans would dry the leaves, grind them up, and smoke them as a relief for asthma. The survivor can use these ground leaves for a tobacco substitute. The roots, leaves, and flowers can be boiled into a tea for sore throats and bronchial irritations. The leaves provide many vitamins and minerals. Although hairy, giving it the name lamb's tongues, lamb's ears, and deer's ears, the leaves are not really offensive when chopped and added to other greens. The seeds, though small, can be ground into a high-protein flour. During the first year, mullein leaves look like the spokes of a wheel, producing what's called a basal rosette. The second year, it produces a tall flower stalk with yellow flowers, followed by seeds. In some parts of the world, it's called torch or torch plant because when the seed heads are dipped in tallow and lit, they're used as torches. Mullein is also a good insulator. The Indians would use mullein leaves to line their moccasins for warmth. Mullein can be found on open ground at any time of the year. Amaranth is another common plant. There are several varieties of this species. It can be found in some seed catalogs as vegetable amaranth because of its high nutritional value. Another bright red variety is called Hopi dye amaranth because the Hopi Indians used it to dye cloth, but it's also edible. Contains more vitamin C than spinach, and some cereal companies have advertised amaranth flakes as the golden grain of the Aztecs. The entire plant can be eaten at various stages. In the fall and winter, the seeds are ground into a very high-protein flour. In the spring, or when the leaves are young and tender, they can be eaten raw. As the leaves mature, they become tough and should be boiled as a cooked green like spinach. The green seeds can be eaten raw, or when mature, ground into a flour. Primrose is another plant with many common names, including pigweed, red root, or wild beet. It too is a biennial. The first year it forms a basal rosette. Through the winter, we can pull up its starch-filled root and eat it raw like a carrot or potato, boiled or baked, or chop it up in a stew or in a stir-fry. When the leaves and flowers are formed, they can be eaten raw. Ongoing research is being conducted on the oil produced by the seeds, gamma-linoleic acid, as a compound to aid people with digestive problems. This is a very nutritious plant and can be found at any time of the year in some form. Goldenrods are familiar to most of us. Many people believe goldenrod causes allergies, but actually it's other plants such as ragweed blooming at the same time, with less noticeable flowers. The fresh or dried flowers of the goldenrod can be boiled into a tea and taste like anise. When a survivor is cold and wet, this drink will pick up the spirits and make him or her feel better. Goldenrod flowers are exported to China as Blue Mountain tea. Throughout the winter, there are large knots on the stems which are called goldenrod galls. These knots are caused by an insect stinging the stem and laying its eggs inside, causing the stem to swell. These large galls protect eggs and larvae during the winter months. Survivors can either eat these larvae or use them for fish bait. Chicory is also known as blue sailor or windflower. This plant is related to the dandelion, and the roots are used to supplement coffee. You simply roast the roots and boil them to make coffee. It contains no caffeine. However, some people think it's more bitter than coffee because of the latex in the roots. In some parts of the world, such as the Mediterranean, chicory is one of the most favored greens. The leaves can be eaten raw, but may be bitter. Therefore, you may prefer to cook them and eat them as a pot herb. The young tender leaves are not bitter, but as the leaf matures, the latex causes the bitter taste. You should boil mature leaves in 2 or 3 changes of water. And you can add sugar, salt, or meat to flavor the greens as they cook. The flowers are blue and resemble dandelions, except for the blue color and the fact that they may be 5 or 6 feet tall. They often grow in clusters and return each year from the same roots. Lamb's quarters get their name from the fact that in Scotland, shepherds would use them as the first food when weaning baby lambs. These plants are easy to digest and can be very tasty. You can eat them raw, chopped up like a salad, or cook them like spinach. They are very nutritious and contain many vitamins. A unique thing about this plant is that when it's mature, it does not develop a bitter taste like many other plants, so lamb quarters can be eaten and taste good at any stage of growth. The small black seeds are about the size of pepper grains and can be ground into a high-protein flour. Some lamb's quarters are called Good King Henry, Big Fat Hen, and Goosefoot, just to name a few of its common names. In Mexico and Central America, it is called epazote, which is used for cooking and has a very spicy smell. This Central American plant looks less like the shape of a goosefoot and more elliptical. When added to beans just before they're done, it acts as an anti-flatulent and helps reduce gas. Along our coast, another relative of lamb's quarters is called salicornia, or glasswort. It stores water in the little fleshy stalks. It is popular with wild food enthusiasts who make pickles from it and add it to soups and stews or cook it in casseroles. The various lamb's quarters can be found almost anywhere in the world in some species, in dry to moist environments, disturbed areas, and particularly around old gardens and stockpiles, along the edges of fields and on compost piles. It seems birds spread them, and once they take hold, they just grow and grow. The Dutch call them Gansvoot, and the British call him Good King Henry. Thistles can be found near roadsides, in open fields, and in disturbed areas any time of year. They are tall plants with prickly-edged leaves. The young tender leaves of the thistle can be eaten raw in a salad or cooked. However, the spines must be removed from the leaf edges before eating. The stalk and bracts can be hairy or hairless. One distinguishing factor in the stems is a milky juice when the stem is broken, similar to a dandelion. Another distinguishing factor are the blossoms, which have loose, somewhat flat top clusters and resemble an old-fashioned shaving brush. Known as poor man's pepper or wild pepper grass, this little plant has many uses. The pungent young leaves can be added raw to salads or cooked as a pot herb. The seeds can be used to provide a taste similar to black pepper to other foods. The plant grows to 2 feet tall and can be found just about anywhere. But plants growing near dumps and along roadsides should be avoided because these plants readily absorb toxins from the soil and air. Poor man's pepper has toothy, elliptical leaves, while its relative cowcress has smooth, elliptical leaves. Both have tiny white flowers followed by flat, rounded seeds like those found inside of a bell pepper, attached to the stalk by short stems. The jewel weeds grow in moist environments, often in full shade, and when blooming are easily recognized by the pale yellow or spotted orange flowers, which look like fruit baskets or horns of plenty. The common name of touch-me-not refers to the habit of the mature seeds shooting a great distance when touched. The stems are succulent and juicy, and the leaves appear silvery or mirror-like on the underside when submerged in water. When they're pulled out, however, they appear to be dry. Although they should be eaten in moderation due to their laxative qualities, the young green plants are excellent boiled. The plant is nutritious and tasty, but the most useful quality is the relief it provides when the juice is rubbed on mosquito bites and bee stings, nettle rashes, and poison oak and poison ivy. There are several members of this group called creasy greens with such common names as winter cress, upland cress, black cress, and Pennsylvania bitter cress. All have typical four-petaled flowers, which may be white or yellow, and they are related to mustards. They have a similar taste and smell, and some of the leaves can be quite spicy. They may be eaten raw or cooked as a pot herb. They may have a bulbous rootstock which can also be eaten. Creasy greens, as they are called in the South, can be found just about anywhere but prefer moister habitats. One of these is our native watercress. This is the exception to eating them raw. Because they are such a large family, yuccas come in a variety of shapes and sizes. The bear grass, Yucca filamentosa, grows close to the ground and provides us with survival needle and thread. The Spanish bayonet may reach 8 feet, and certain yuccas may have flower stalks up to 30 feet tall. The flowers of all yuccas can be eaten raw or cooked. Green fruits are shaped like pickles and are treated as vegetables and can be eaten roasted, baked, or boiled. Ripe fruits are dark purple or black, mushy and sweet, and can be eaten fresh or dried as fruit leather. The fleshy roots of some yuccas can be baked like a huge potato. Other yuccas produce a shampoo lather called a mole when their roots are crushed and thrashed in water. The tender growing tips of greenbriers and catbriers are edible and nutritious. Because there are so many species, flavor varies greatly. Some are sweet and can be eaten fresh, while others need to be boiled or steamed to remove the bitterness. It is a trial and error process once you've identified the plant. The pounded roots of some greenbrier species produces a jello-like substance when boiled. Nettles are stinging plants found in full to filtered sun and generally in a moist environment. They are erect, tall plants with stinging cells and hairs along the stem and clusters of small, almost overlooked white flowers. The stinging cells make collection a chore, but the plant is very rich in vitamins and minerals, and when cooked tastes better than many other greens. Use gloves or tongs to collect the plants and boil them for 10 to 15 minutes to make them tender and destroy the stinging cells. The plant may be eaten any time, but is best in the spring when less than a foot tall. Golden club is a wild edible that we can easily recognize because of the golden flower heads. We find these in streams and ponds. Once you recognize the flower in the spring, you can go back to harvest the seeds in the late summer and the fall. The plant is related to Aro arum and Jack in the pulpit and contains a chemical, calcium oxalate. This is a burning caustic chemical, and before the seeds and roots are used, they must be thoroughly dried or roasted. Then test them carefully to be sure they don't have this chemical in them. They can be ground and used as a flour or added to soups as a thickener. The water hyacinth can be found in quiet or slow-moving water throughout most of the southeastern United States. The leaf blades are roundish and range from 2 to 5 inches tall. At the leaf stalk's base are balloon-like swellings. The young leaves and leaf stalks, while light green in color, can be boiled or fried until crisp. The flowers are 6-lobed, bluish-purple, clustered on a spike in the center of a floating rosette of leaves, and on the upper lobes of the flowers are yellow centers. The flowers can be boiled and have the consistency of gelatin. Do not eat the water hyacinth raw, or any other water plant for that matter. The water hyacinth may cause an itching sensation when cooked, so try it sparingly at first to see if you have a reaction. Wherever you find cattails growing, if you dig just below the surface of the soil, you'll find water. Cattails are known by some people as the supermarket of the swamp because the entire plant is edible at one time of year or another. The flowering male flowerhead produces the golden yellow pollen, which is used to make bread and is sold in gourmet food stores at high prices. You can shake the pollen into a sack or strip the male flower off to make muffins. The female flower is green and tender and is found below the male flower. This is the part we refer to as the cattail. When green and tender, the female flower can be boiled in salt water and tastes much like corn on the cob. In the spring, when cattails are first coming up, you can use the shoots inside the stalk. This is sometimes called Cossack asparagus. In other parts of the world, like Russia, they are very popular. You should peel off the outer leaves of the stalk to locate the tender inner part, which has a sweet taste with a consistency of celery. A word of caution, though, with any water plant, you must boil it first to purify it. You cannot eat raw water plants because of waterborne diseases and parasites located in the water. I cannot overemphasize this fact. When the cattail is old and brown in the winter, the roots can be removed from mud to locate a starchy root. The young tender growth can be eaten boiled or baked like a potato or other root vegetable. The old tough fibrous roots can be placed in water and pounded to obtain a light starchy liquid. You then boil off the water to retain the starch and dry it until it is hard. Pound this dried starch into a flour. When the brown seed head is mature and completely dry, it can be burned and the smoke will act as an insect and mosquito repellent, lasting for 2 hours or more. You can also scorch the seed head to obtain an excellent field expedient camouflage. The fluff inside the cattail can be used as insulation by stuffing it in your clothes. It's extremely warm. Even in the winter, when the cattail is covered with ice and snow, seed heads can be broken open to reveal the fluff, which can be used as tinder to start fires. Cattails can be found from Alaska to the tip of South America and on the other continents, and it cannot be mistaken for any other plant. There are many varieties of grapes. Obviously, you can eat the grapes themselves, but the flavor varies from vine to vine. Some are sweet while others are very tart. When the leaves are young and tender, they can be eaten in salads or boiled as a cooked green. Older leaves are soaked in brine or salted water until they become tender, and then used to wrap around meat or meat and ground rice for a dish similar to our stuffed cabbage. In Greece, this popular dish is called dolmades. Grapevines also provide water to the survivor. Reach up as high as you can and notch the vine. Then about 2 feet from the ground, completely cut through the vine and place a container under it to catch the water. Many people neglect that part of the plant which is left in the ground and also produces water. In this final portion of the video on edible wild plants of North America, we're going to be talking about some of the fruits and nuts and berries that you find across the country. I want to bear in mind that while we've been shooting this film over many months, sometimes it was over 100 degrees and one time it was 13 degrees. It just goes to show that when you learn to positively identify wild plants for food, that you can always find something to eat, whether it's very hot or very cold, whether it's wet or whether it's dry. There's always something out there to eat. You just want to make sure that you positively identify the plants you use for food. Blackberries and their kin, raspberries, salmonberries, thimbleberries, and wineberries, are found pretty much all over the world. There are many different varieties, which are commonly called blackberries, brambles, or dewberries. Some books will tell you, in fact, that there are as many as 250 species in the United States alone. So we'll just refer to them all as blackberries. Blackberries are pretty well known because of the Uncle Remus story where the rabbit tricked the bear into throwing him into the briar patch. Blackberries can be eaten fresh and provide a lot of sugar. However, some are pretty tart until they're ripe. They're high in vitamin C and can be eaten raw or cooked, boiled with honey or some other sweetener if you have it, to make a sauce to improve the flavor of gamey meat. In the spring, you can eat the tender young leaves raw. If they're bitter, you can boil them. Blackberry roots can be boiled to make a tea, which is an excellent anti-diarrheal medicine. Blackberries are found in open and disturbed areas, along the edges of fields and forests. They generally grow in dry environments. However, some raspberries and wineberries will grow in moister environments. There are so many different varieties that you can find them just about anywhere. The color of the fruit ranges from blue or black to red depending on which variety you find. Some of the raspberries may even have yellow fruit. Blackberry plants may be trailing vines on the ground, or they may be large plants up to 6 feet tall. Everybody's familiar with strawberries, and there are several different varieties. They're probably one of the best and sweetest wild fruits available. When they are ripe, they're extremely sweet and can be added to less tasty game foods to improve their flavor. An important thing about strawberries is that the leaves are extremely high in vitamin C. Ewell Gibbons did some tests on strawberry leaves. He took his results to Johns Hopkins University, and they found that this is one of the highest sources of vitamin C you can locate in the wild. You can make a sweet tea out of strawberry leaves almost all year round. Blueberries and huckleberries can be found in open sun, semi-shaded, or filtered sun areas, but they are nearly always found in acid soil, such as around pine trees, and in moist areas. There are many varieties of blueberries, and they can be found all across the country. There are high bush blueberries and their relatives, the huckleberries, and there are low bush blueberries. The distinction between a blueberry and a huckleberry is one has white seeds and the other seeds are black in color, but they are pretty much the same. Blueberries are a very acidic fruit, and eating too many can cause constipation. They can be eaten raw, cooked, or dried. You can find blueberries on any size bush. There are some low bush blueberries that grow in the northeastern and northwestern United States that are no larger than a foot tall, but produce a very large amount of berries. Blueberry leaves can be brewed into a tea. Passion fruit or passion flower is not an aphrodisiac as the name implies, but just the opposite. The dried leaves are used in commercial preparations and in herbal teas as a sedative or a sleep inducer because they calm the nerves. The fruit is green when immature and has a cucumber taste. Some people cook them like squash, either fried, boiled, or roasted. When they're ripe, you can break open the papery yellow husk and suck out the flesh off the seeds. They have a very pleasant lemon scent and a sweet flavor that is indescribable. Most people think it's called passion fruit because they're so sweet that everyone loves them, or because of the non-existent aphrodisiac qualities. However, passiflora translates out as passion flower, and incarnata refers to the crucifixion or passion story. You can see the various parts of the crucifixion story in the flower. In South America and in other parts of the world, relatives of our passion fruit have egg-shaped fruits that are yellow, purple, or red. The red fruit found in South America is called grenadillas because it looks like a little grenade. This South American fruit is used to make grenadine syrup used in drinks. Several species of elderberries are found throughout the country, mostly in wet environments. Elders grow as shrubs that can be up to 20 feet tall. In England, the shrubs are believed to attract witches and provide them sanctuary. Red-berried elders should be avoided because they are generally considered not to be edible. Those with blue or black berries provide nutritious food. The berries are rather bland eaten raw but become sweet with cooking or drying. The white flower clusters can be eaten raw or dipped in batter and fried. The rest of the plant is considered poisonous and should not be used in cooking. To avoid confusing elders with poisonous lookalikes, cut through the stalk and look for a firm white pith in the center. The wild cherry has relatives all over the United States, called fire cherry, choke cherry, and of course the black cherry. Cherries are lumped together as prunus species with plums. Wild cherries are very tart until they're ripe. They can be eaten out of hand and provide some vitamins and moisture, as well as sugar. They make excellent cooked fruit, jams, jellies, and wine. The seed or pit takes up about half the fruit and should not be eaten since it may contain cyanide. The leaves, wood, and bark of cherry trees will have an almond-like smell, indicating the presence of the cyanide-containing chemical. Therefore, you should avoid the leaves, wood, and bark when cooking, since it contains the same compound as the seeds. There are many different varieties of wild plums. They can be found in many parts of the United States as well as other parts of the world. Common name for wild plums include Chickasaw plums, Indian plums, and beach plums, which indicates where they might grow. Wild plums are about the size of a ping-pong ball. Unripened fruits can be tart, but as they mature, they sweeten up. The ripest fruits are usually found on the ground under the tree. Plums can be eaten raw or cooked like stewed plums. Colors range from orange and yellow to red and purple, so don't depend on color to determine its maturity. Instead, feel the plum to see if it's ripe. Plums contain a large seed, which should also be avoided since they may contain cyanide. Wild plums can be found all over the country, at the edges of forests, in undisturbed open fields, and near beaches. Persimmon trees are generally short, but they may grow as much as 60 feet tall. The fruits are about the size of a golf ball in this country and orange to purple when ripe. At this time, they are mushy and sweet. In other parts of the world, persimmons may grow as large as a closed fist. Their unpleasant astringency when green has caused people to use them to play tricks on their friends. Unripe fruits will pucker up your mouth to the point where even speech is difficult, and whistling is out of the question. After drying, the leaves can be made into a tea rich in vitamin C. The leaves can be roasted or boiled and eaten for a rich protein source. Persimmons are very sweet when ripe and can be used to make fruit leathers, dried, or eaten raw. The botanical name, Diospyros, means bread of the gods and refers to their taste when ripe. Persimmon trees are popular with wildlife and are a good place to put your traps and snares. Identification is easy. The trees have very rough bark like alligator skin. The fruits have 6 to 8 seeds in most cases, in this country, and a little star on the back of the fruit where it attaches to the tree, and the leaves are frequently spotted. Husk tomato, ground cherry, and Cape gooseberry are some of the common names this plant goes by, but the one that helps most in identification is Chinese lantern. Physalis is in the nightshade family, and only the ripe fruits are edible. They'll be orange to yellow and have a combination of tart and sweet taste. The fruits resemble small tomatoes enclosed in a husk or Chinese lantern. The leaves are elliptical and gray, and the plant closely resembles its relative, the eggplant. Will have bell-shaped yellow flowers. It can be found just about anywhere, but Chinese lantern or husk tomato prefers open, sunny areas. Juniper, which is actually the red cedar, produces a blue berry or fruit. When it's ripe and mature, this berry is used in many European recipes, and you can find them in the spice racks in the stores. There's a little confusion about the name, because juniper berries grow on cedar trees in this country, but the scientific name of cedar trees is Juniperus virginiana. The berry is also used to flavor gin, so if you taste these berries, you'll get a typical gin flavor. If you use these berries while cooking game, it will taste away the gamey or fatty taste. If you look closely at the berries when they're mature, you'll see that they are blue, Some berries, however, are covered with a white fungus or yeast. Mixed with flour, it will act as a field-expedient leavening agent or yeast and cause homemade bread or field-made bread to rise. The sumac tree has a bad reputation because of its poisonous relative. There are several varieties of non-poisonous sumac, and they can be recognized by their hairy stems, while the poison sumac has smooth stems. Both have 7 to 13 leaflets, but the leaflets on non-poisonous sumac have toothed edges, and the leaves on poison sumac are generally smooth. An old saying, "Never trust a smoothie," helps us identify poison sumac. The non-poison sumac tree generally grows in a drier environment and has red seeds or berries, while the poison sumac usually grows along streams or near water and has white seeds. The red seeds from the non-poison sumac, when they first form in the fall, are oily and often covered with fine hairs. They're full of vitamin C, and if we soak these red berries in cold water, it will produce a tart pink drink with a lemonade flavor, hence the name Indian lemonade. The bark of the sumac tree is used to dye leather, clothing, and wood, and is also used in making craft baskets. The wood, when thoroughly dried, is prized in some parts of the country by moonshiners because it will burn with a smokeless fire. This may be an important wood for the survivor in hiding. Willows are found just about any place there is water. All the species have tender edible shoots and leaves, and edible flowers called catkins in the spring. Willows are most widely known for their use as a natural source of aspirin. Simply boil the leaves and bark to extract the salicylic acid, which is the generic name of aspirin. The seeds or berries of all the hollies are poisonous, and the leaves are questionable in many, especially when green. One holly, however, the Yopon holly, contains caffeine and is used as a substitute for coffee by boiling the leaves after they've been roasted or dried. Made too strong, as the scientific name Ilex vomitoria suggests, causes nausea and vomiting. This tree is common along the sea coast and has scalloped leaf edges in contrast to the typical spiked leaves we associate with other hollies. There are many varieties of nut trees around the country, and they can be useful to the survivor, not just for food. The leaves of the walnut tree can be boiled to make an antifungal medication for athlete's foot, ringworm, and other skin irritations. The two common types of walnut are the black walnut and the white walnut. In England, before the nuts are mature, they are pickled and used as a condiment to go with game dishes. Both of these nuts are rich in protein and high in oil. There is so much oil in both walnuts that you can boil the meats and extract the oil for cooking or even for maintenance of a weapon. In fact, the white walnut or butternut contains so much oil that during the Civil War and the Depression, people would boil the chopped up nut meats until the oil floated to the surface. Then they skimmed this oil off the top and whipped it into a mock butter. That's where the name butternut comes from. The leaves and hulls of the butternut are used to dye leather and clothing. Confederate soldiers were called butternuts because the dye used for their uniforms came from the leaves of the butternut tree. In North America, there are about 50 to 60 varieties of oaks. The nuts from all oak trees are known as acorns. All acorns are edible, but flavor and edibility varies greatly from species to species. Basically, there are two types of oaks. The red and the black oaks are lumped together, and their leaves have lobes with a little point at the end of each lobe. The white oaks has smoothly lobed leaves without the points. Maritime and live oaks are evergreen oaks with oval leaves. These characteristics should be used to tell them apart. The chemical in the acorns that makes them bitter is called tannin or tannic acid. Many of the white oaks are virtually free of tannic acid when they're dried. The red and black oaks are generally high in tannic acid, which must be leached out prior to consumption. When this country was being settled, the Native Americans would leach out the tannic acid by submerging a basket of acorns into a stream or boiling them until all the tannic acid was removed. If the Indians boiled the nuts, They would save the brown liquid and use it to preserve leather. There are buckskin clothes in museums that have been preserved for over 200 years using this tannic acid water. This water can be used externally to dry up poison ivy and oak rashes or burns. It is also an excellent antifungal, which can be used for athlete's foot and other skin rashes. You can make acorn flour by preparing as follows. First, shell the nuts. Leach the tannic acid from them until they're no longer bitter. Dry and roast the nuts and then grind them into a fine powder. This flour can be used to make anything that calls for flour, such as pancakes, muffins, or bread. Along streams and riverbanks, we can find two varieties of hazelnuts. The American hazelnut, although small, looks like the filberts found in our Christmas mixtures. The other variety, the beaked hazelnut, looks like a little trumpet or bird's beak and is mostly found in the northern states. Ripe hazelnuts are hard to find because the squirrels like them so much they take them as soon as the nut is fully formed. When a nut is fully formed, even though it is green and bitter, it can be stored and will continue to ripen. Once ripe, it can be eaten and has a very sweet taste. Another nut tree in the hardwood forest and often found along riverbanks is the beech tree. The nuts on the beech are easily recognized because they're small and triangularly shaped. The nut can be eaten right out of the shell or ground into a flour. Beech trees are easily recognized because they're the only large tree in the forest with smooth bark. There are several varieties of hickory found throughout the country. Hickory is famous for providing flavor to game or other smoked meat. In fact, the nut hulls and wood chips are specifically sold for this purpose. Hulls are particularly useful to smoke and preserve game or fish in a survival situation. A close relative of the hickory is the pecan. Originally, pecans were found in the Mississippi Valley, but they have spread throughout the southern states to become a major crop and can now be found almost anywhere. Pecans have a much softer shell, so they're easier to open than the hickory. They can be eaten raw or cooked. Two other nuts that can be encountered just about anywhere are the chestnut and its close relative, the chinkapin. The chestnuts contain 2 or 3 nuts to each burr with stickers all over the outside. The smaller chinkapins are found on bushes rather than trees, and each burr contains only 1 nut. Both of these nuts can be eaten raw or dried and ground into a flour. Some wild food enthusiasts roast chestnuts and use them to make a coffee substitute. There are so many different varieties of pine trees that scientists lump them all together and just call them the pinus species. For many years, survivalists have called pine trees the grocery store of the woods. The seeds, which are available in the winter months, can be eaten and are called pine nuts. In Italy, they're called pignoli, and in other parts of the world, Chinese pine nuts. Actually, they're not a nut at all, just the seed of the pine tree. They're very high in protein, but more importantly to the survivor in winter conditions, they're also high in oil, which helps produce heat in the body. All pine seeds can be eaten, but vary greatly in size, from the size of a tick up to the size of a large lima bean. The inner bark of the pine tree can also be eaten after removing the rough outer bark. This inner bark can be eaten raw or can be shredded and ground into a flour. The needles can be made into a tasty tea that is high in vitamin C by pouring scalding hot water over the needles and letting it steep. If you simmer the needles, it will destroy the vitamin C, but this boiling extracts an oil into the water, which is good for sore throats and coughs.